So this week we're going to go through functions and views. So it's 2 chapters, so it's going to be a little bit more work than previous weeks. The function chapter is a little bit longer and more involved than the view chapter, just because there's a lot of built-in functions that are in the SQL language. So we start out covering the different string functions. And all of these examples that I'm giving you, you can actually run in SSMS. They don't require a table or a column, but you can use them with tables and columns. So, you know, I can run this kind of as is. Okay, or I could choose some of the data here. Let's see. I don't know if we want authors, sales. Okay, we'll do titles. So let's say we wanted to see the length of a title. We can just put the column name in here. Name it title length. Say from titles. And then we run it. So for each of the titles, it's just displaying the length. So you can apply these to columns in your tables or to text strings that you just type in. Left trim or right trim removes additional spaces. So left removes them on the left, right gets rid of them on the right. Left string length actually will retrieve whatever number of characters that you specify from the left of a string, and right retrieves the characters from the right side of the string. So going back, so instead of just counting the characters, I could say left title, and let's retrieve the first 10 characters. Okay, or I could change this to right and retrieve the last 10 characters. Okay, so we've got left, we've got right, we've got substring where I can start wherever I want and retrieve whatever number of characters I want. We have a replace where you can replace a word or a phrase with another word or phrase. And we're just replacing it in the result set. So let's see what our titles look like. Okay, I don't know if I see a word used more than once. Cooking. Okay, so cooking is in here a couple different times. So I could say select replace title, looking for the word cooking. Replacing it with baking. And of course, I need to put the quotes in because those are strings. Ay. We'll try that. From titles. Here we go. A lot of work. So the ones that had cooking now have baking. And there was another one down here, computer baking, whatever. Okay, so this is just changing it in the result set and not in the table itself. So you can kind of see how those work. Reverse string shows it backwards, which could be interesting. So you can kind of look through here. I encourage you guys to copy these and paste them and try running them, changing it up a little bit. The numeric functions are also useful. The round function will let you round the trailing decimals. Is numeric checks to see if it's a number or not. Ceiling is going to round up and floor rounds down. The rand function is particularly interesting because it randomly produces values, and you can actually use those values to randomly retrieve rows. And I have you using this in the textbook assignment, so you'll get some practice with that. We also have date time functions. And I've got a lot of examples that are using the date, February 25th, 2018. But you can kind of see how those work as well. Get date is particularly useful if you have a database where you need to fill in a ship date or an order date. It'll just retrieve the current date. Day, month, and year return those portions of a date that you want. So the 2-digit day, the 2-digit month, or the 4-digit year. There are functions that let you do calculations with dates because dates are stored as numbers. So there's examples of how to do that as well. And then we get into other functions, which are very similar to programming languages. The case function lets you determine what the contents of a column is going to be. And you can see that you have lots of different options. So let's take a look at this one. So what we're doing here is we're going to figure out what is going to be in the quantity text column. And so it's going to look at quantity, and if it's greater than 30, it's going to display this. If it's equal to 30, it displays this. And if it's anything else, it displays that in this third column that we're creating. Okay, and so the syntax of the case statement is you have the keyword case, you have a keyword end, and then you have your when statements. And if it isn't any of the conditions met by the when statements, then you would have an else statement that would handle everything else. The as quantity text is the alias that you are giving the name of the column. Okay, so you can see a couple different examples. The if function is pretty straightforward. It works very similar to the if function in Excel spreadsheets, where you have some kind of a condition that you're checking, and then you tell it what to do if it's true and what to do if it is false. The choose function allows you to pick a value to display in the column based on an integer. Okay, and it starts numbering those values at 1. So if we said to choose the third one, it is going to pick developer. Okay, here we're choosing the month. So we've got a higher date and we're pulling out the month portion, and we basically want to know the season. So you can see that these seasons are matched up to months. So this is month 1, month 2, month 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through month 12. Coalesce basically allows you to string a bunch of columns together, and the first column that is not a null value is the one that it retrieves. You are going to have an exercise where you work with different types of salaries, and they can only have one salary type. So when it hits a type of salary that is not null, it will display the result. Is null lets you look for a null value in a column and replace it with something else. So if you're dealing with money columns or quantity columns, and there are orders or that type of thing, displaying the word null can confuse people. So replacing it with 0 makes perfect sense. Then we get into grouping. So you can actually use a grouping function inside the case statement. And so here's an example where we've got the vendor state, vendor city. You'll notice that we're using aggregates in here. And we are grouping by vendor state and vendor city. We are using rollup, which is an extension. And then you can see we've got a little order by. But the problem doing it this way is that we get these nulls where the totals should be. So there is a workaround for that, and that is to use grouping. So inside the case statement, okay, we can say when grouping vendor state equals 1, we can have it put all in there. Okay, and so basically it's checking to see if there would have been a null, and if there was a null, it puts all in its place. Okay, and it's doing the same thing for city. Okay, so here's state null, and if we say replace the null word with all, that's going to become all. For city, you're going to see it more often. We have a lot of nulls for city, and then it's changing that to all as well. Okay, and you can see how that works. Then we have ranking functions. These are not going to be on the certification exam. You guys can look over these, but this is not something that is critical for you guys to know. They are not used very often. Neither are the analytic functions. I've just included them in here because your book does go through them. And so it's helpful to see the examples so you can kind of see how they work. So that's chapter 9. Then you are going to do the textbook assignment. In order to do this assignment, there is a script that you are going to need to copy and run. And this is the one I was telling you about where you've got employees and there's different types of pay. And so they can only be paid one way. And so there's going to be a lot of null values here. And that's going to be useful for practicing some of those functions. So you're going to go ahead and run that script. Okay, and then you'll notice that I got videos for all of the tasks in here. And then we've got our scenarios that you're going to work through. Okay, so that's the textbook assignment. The lab assignment, you're going to be creating your own queries. And you are going to need to use choose. And then a lot of people get confused on that. So I do have a video for you to watch. There's also a video explaining how to use case with grouping and rollup. That was also just in the lecture demo that we went through quickly. But here's a video that explains it in more detail. And so what you're going to do for this one is you are creating your own queries. Now, I would not do anything super complex, right? So there's a ton of string functions. I would find a variable character column, like title, or, if you're looking at Northwind, you have lots of options up here. You have products, product name is character. So just find a character column and, pick some of those functions to practice with. You've got number functions. You need to create a query that uses the rand function. And then one additional query that uses a numeric function. In the textbook assignment, you will see how you can use the rand function to randomly retrieve rows. So you can do a variation of that for the rand function here. And you can use whatever database or tables you want, including your term project for this. You need to do two queries that use date and time functions, but you cannot use the same function twice. But I do think, there's enough of those functions that you have plenty to choose from. Then you need to create a query that uses case, if, and choose. And finally, you need to do a query that uses case with grouping and rollup, and a query that uses either is null or coalesce. Okay, so that is the assignment, and you will be making these up using your own data. Now, what you very well may have to do, is be a little creative and, add a row to something, like I did here, to the store name, where I have some null values. Okay, so I just went in and edited that. So I went into pubs, went into stores, right clicked, I chose edit top 200 rows. And that allowed me to add this one on the bottom where I left zip code null. Okay, so you may have to do something like that in order to have null values to work with. Views. So chapter 9 is going to take you guys longer than views. All a view is, it is a select statement that you save as a database object, and then you can retrieve data from it just like you retrieve data from a table. Okay, so that's basically the concept. And so the lecture demo basically goes through, explains how to create a view, how to update views, how to delete views, how to use them in a select statement. But as I mentioned, this is really straightforward. Views are saved as database objects. So what that means is that if you look at something like the Northwind database, okay, where they've got all of their tables, below that there is a view folder, and they have all of their views listed here. And you can actually see how these views were created. If you want additional, more real life examples, you can right click on it and you can say script view as, and you can choose create and put it in a new window. And it's going to show you the code that was actually used to create that view. Okay, and that brings me to the point that they are getting in up here with the create statement, where you've got these options that you can specify. With encryption is an option. And if you use with encryption, people will not be able to right click and choose script view as, create to, new window. That will not work. Okay, if you use with encryption, they are not going to be able to see the code used to create the view. Okay, so that option actually, if you want a secure database, that is a really good option to use. With schema binding, basically says that if a view is using data from a table, you cannot delete the table. You'd have to delete the view first, and then you could delete the table, which makes perfect sense because the view is using the table. So as you work through here, I do think it's pretty straightforward. Down here is just, kind of a normal select. And then you've got the different check options that you can specify. And here is how you would add schema binding. That is right below create view. And then you can just simply select either everything from the view or whatever columns you want to see. So this is all pretty straightforward. The only other thing that I think you may get hung up on is how do you do an updatable view? And what an updatable view does is it lets you update the data in the table used to create the view. So we got our views down here, right? But then we got all of our tables. And you can actually use the view to update rows in your table. But there are some kind of nitpicky conditions for that. You can actually insert data, insert rows into table using views. You can delete rows from tables using views. But those requirements for being able to do that are listed here. Okay, so if you just create a super simple view that doesn't have any joins, doesn't have any calculated columns, where it's pretty straightforward, you're just displaying a certain number of columns, those are pretty easy to do insert statements with and delete statements with. But if you start getting into more complicated views, then you could run into problems. So kind of keep these in mind when you are doing your views. And again, a view is a database object that is stored with the database itself, as you saw when I showed you all of the views that were being saved with Northwind. And because these views are saved with the database, the names of them do have to be kind of unique, within the database itself. Now, what if I wanted to actually run one of these? Okay, well, that's pretty easy. I would just select whatever columns I want from, and then I would just use the name of the view. Okay, so that is retrieving the data from the view. And the reason a database administrator creates a view is it does provide more security. The person running the query is not really accessing the tables directly. They are only accessing the columns and the data that the database administrator wants them to see. Okay, so instead of having access to everything, it's limited access. Okay, and the way we are going to do it is through code. However, as everything else, SSMS does have a view designer that would let you use the interface to create the view instead. In addition to the views that I just showed you that come with Northwind, there are some views that are part of the system itself. And so this shows you how to use those views as well. I think seeing foreign keys is kind of useful, and seeing constraints is as well. So you can try running those. I've got a couple examples for you. And that brings me to the assignment. You have a textbook assignment that's basically going to show you, how to create a view, how to update using a view, all of the things that I just went over very quickly, you are going to get hands-on working with here. Then for the lab assignment, this is part 2 of your final project, milestone 3. So you're going to be using your final project database, and you're going to be creating 4 views. 3 of them can be whatever you want. One of them, you need to be able to update data in one of your tables. Okay, so you've got 3 views. Doesn't matter if you can update data or not. One of them You need to be able to update data. And then you're going to use that view, the view that updates data, to modify data in a column. Or if you want to insert a row or do something else, that's fine too. But you need to do some type of update with it. Okay. And so that is the assignment. You'll notice I did give you an example here. I've kind of labeled what I'm doing using my fictional bakery. You'll notice I also have all sorts of resources down here, videos, different articles that you guys can take a look at regarding functions and views. If you have any questions, run into problems, please let me know, and have an awesome week.